Many Canadians are still shocked over the news that was delivered this week that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is proroguing Parliament and has decided to resign. To talk more about this is a professor in the Department of Political Science. I'm here with Dr. Lars Hallström. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you for joining me today.
So, Dr. Hallström, can you just tell us what does it mean to prorogue Parliament, and what's the difference between proroguing and just having a recess?
Certainly. So proroguing Parliament is a mechanism to essentially end the current session of Parliament, which we know will be in effect until the end of March of this year, when the next session of Parliament will then begin anew. It means that the legislative activities of Parliament are functionally done until the end of that time. So it's not a coffee break, it's not a pause. A recess is typically more of a pause button and then you restart. In this case, essentially, we've gone beyond a pause and we'll restart with potentially even a new leader of the Liberal Party at the end of March.
Doesn't that mean that Canadians and governments can miss out on a lot of things then? Because there were things that may have been set in motion or some laws that may have been passed, or like some bills that were about to be passed and now they won't be? Is that what that means?
There is, in some cases, good reason to be concerned, although some of your colleagues in the press have noted that certain pieces of legislation coming from the Senate and from different backbenchers will effectively be done. They'll be killed in terms of process. But in many cases, the work of the government, particularly as it pertains to, say, Albertans, is already done because a lot of the budgetary transfers have already taken place. And so those funds are now being managed and utilized by the province of Alberta itself and the other provinces. So we do have a bit of a gap from a legislative standpoint, but we also have, again, this is not the first time this has happened. It's not a new undertaking. Stephen Harper did it a few times as well. And it serves some political and strategic purposes as well.
And why was it important for the Prime Minister to prorogue Parliament? Because some Canadians are saying that he only did it in order to buy more time or have more time in power as leader and to avoid a non-confidence vote.
I think that's a fair and fairly astute assertion. Certainly a number of people have pointed that out. If you're trying to maintain the integrity of a party that's in a minority government but is still governing, of course, you want to do what's best for the party. There have been a number, as he himself pointed out, internal attacks. So he's been playing defense on both sides, right, of within the party and across the aisle. So I think it makes sense for him to try to build in a bit of a buffer, noting that, again, he can, and there's some precedent for this, stay on as Prime Minister while the leader of the Liberal Party is determined through the process that is set out by the party itself. May need to be abbreviated. We should be able to do it, or they should be able to do it in a shorter period than typically they give themselves for a leadership race. But largely, I think it is correct to say that it makes sense strategically to avoid the non-confidence vote, maintain some stability, allow things to settle down a little bit, find a viable leadership candidate, and then prepare the country for a general election before October.
So what are the next steps for the Liberal Party in choosing their new leader? And do Canadians get involved with it like we would have, with a by-election like we recently had in Lethbridge West?
There are very detailed rules set out by the federal Liberal Party about how leadership races take place. It's quite a lengthy process. It requires a lot of signatures. There's a bunch of steps involved. And that may be a bit more than the party and the Canadian public necessarily have the appetite for. There have been suggestions from people within the party that it could be sorted out in maybe 30 days, maybe 45, doesn't need to be 90 days or longer. So we'll see what the party decides to do. There have been suggestions around maybe town halls, around finding a way to fill the vacuum and fill that void for the party. But of course, right now, we just have speculation as to who the potential candidates in that leadership race would be.
And do you have any speculation on who some of these candidates could be? I've heard the name former BC Premier Christy Clark mentioned.
She's been taking French lessons. That's been noted, so good for her. I think Madame Freeland certainly is a possibility. Carney is another that's been put out there. What the public appetite for that is, I can't say. There's always the balance of as the Prime Minister himself pointed out, wanting to have a national race and being aware of the fact that it is for federal politics and for the Prime Minister's potentially role. So not hand-picking or being too narrow and saying, well, we really need to favor Quebec, or that, we want somebody from Alberta, but actually having it speak to the country as a country.
And as they say, history always repeats itself, and this is already starting to sound a lot like what happened years ago when Kim Campbell came in to replace Brian Mulroney and served for a few months. And do you see history repeating itself here?
Well, we saw the Conservatives implode. I actually was part of a group at the U of C that did a survey in the '93 election, so I remember that implosion really, really well. Who knows how the public will respond, to be honest, moving into the next election. I think the leadership process and selection will be really important. It's not an easy role to step into. Canadians are not happy with the state of politics and policy more generally. I think there's a strong degree of dissatisfaction with the tenor, if you will, or the tone of politics, both in Ottawa and maybe in provincial politics as well. So people are looking for responses to real day problems, sometimes maybe a little bit unreasonably. There are other forces at play in our world that we have no control over. But it's going to be a very, very difficult role to move into, both from a policymaking and a leadership and agenda setting standpoint, and the fact that if you are stepping into a federal election, could be a minority government again, or we could see that swing back. And I would suggest it's quite likely that we could see a Conservative government in the House in the next 12 months.
What would it take for the new Liberal leader to save the party's reputation?
Ooh. If I had a good answer for that one, I would be very, very wealthy. I think there are a lot of bridges, to be honest. Obviously, people are concerned about affordability, housing, cost of housing, and pressures on housing related to affordability and how to support their families. Inflation, of course, is still a consideration. The political rhetoric around immigration is, I think, still rather tense. Not necessarily with full justification, but it's a very useful political space in which to try to gain some traction. So you have to be able to speak to those more almost mundane and day-to-day policy initiatives and policy questions that are really facing Canadians. The Trudeau government early on came in with a big agenda around climate change, around legalization of marijuana, around LGBTQ identity, things that really resonated at that time and that resonated with the public. And we've seen a bit of a withering away with that, especially post-COVID. So I think coming back, it's not a question of rebuilding trust, but rebuilding brand and rebuilding orientation to solutions.
And what do you see as his future after he steps down?
I have no idea. Stephen Harper, of course, has a consulting company. I'm not sure that that's something that Mr. Trudeau would want to do. His now former partner has just released a book, self-help book. So who knows? But certainly people in that position and from that family have lots of connections, and there'll be lots of opportunities.
Absolutely. Dr. Lars Hallström is a political science professor at the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Hallström, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in.
And for Birch City News, I'm Naveen Day.